All right, so today I have a friend on the podcast who's also my literary agent, Scott Miller. We're going to talk about his book, Career on Course. This is book number 7. You know me and my 7, so I thought it was appropriate to bring him on for now. This book highlights all of his success. His previous 6 books, he kind of pokes at himself. But this one, I'm telling you, it's my favorite, and I've read them all. Scott, thank you so much for being here.
What an honor. And you are right. This is kind of a transition for me because I don't use myself as a punching bag. It's more, here's something I did pretty well in my career, so I hope you learn from them.
So you start with, it's broken up into 10 chapters, and each chapter gives us a little thing to think about and be proactive on. I love how you start with chapter 1 on having personal values, right? So you have personal values and professional values. With your personal values, how often are you reviewing those?
I think it relates to your roles in life. Your roles drive your values.
Okay.
And so the first challenge is know your professional values, which very few people even have their personal values identified. It depends on what circumstance you're in life. If you've just gotten married, you have a new role. If you just had your first child, you have a new role. If you're taking care of your aging parents, you have a new role. If you've ended a relationship, you've lost a role. Your personal values are revisited when your substantial roles in life change. Now, I probably, like you, have 15 different roles. I don't have 15 values. It just so happens that my roles have changed. I got married in the last decade. My wife had 3 boys in 5 years. And so those roles changed. But ironically, my values didn't because they were sort of larger than my roles. But to answer your question, I think you revisit your values when a substantial role in life changes.
Okay. Because I look at my values. You have a list of 7.
I do.
Which I thought was fun.
You do your research. This is why your podcast is so great, because you actually read your guest research and books, and I appreciate that about you.
I have 4. Mine are not a single word. A is A. That's always been one of mine. A is not B, A is not C, A is A. Number 2 is know your resources and treasure them. Number 3 is believe in things others say can't be done. Number 4 has been enjoy the ride. I always check in on those daily to make sure that when I'm having fun, am I challenging myself? Am I taking care of the people that take care of me? Am I living my most authentic version?
I would argue your values transcend your roles. I think for most people in life, they haven't even identified their values yet. I think the purpose of the exercise is to take the time to sit down and write out your personal values. Write them out, hierarchically rank them, memorize them, get committed to them. And then once you've identified your personal values, you can move to your professional values. The vast majority of us haven't done the basic work to codify, memorize, and align our behaviors, decisions, and our priorities with our values. We talk a good game, but most people haven't done that work.
I love how you gave yourself permission in my professional world. I want to make money.
Yes.
I think sometimes we have a little stigma about that, but why are we working? We're making money.
You and I share courage as a personality trait. When people identify their professional values, it's important you don't pick them based on what someone else will think about you. Your values are your own business. I work for a living. I don't work for joy and entertainment. I'm the sole provider for my family, like you are with your family. I unabashedly will tell you my number 1 professional value is to maximize my income. My number 2 professional value is to work for a brand and with a company that I'm supportive of, but not so much that I'll go to the Goodwill or to the Red Cross. Great organizations, they can't pay me what I need to raise my family. So when people are picking their professional values, it's most important that they don't pick them with anybody else's care in mind. They're your values and no one else's opinion matters.
Got that? Now, here's the thing. This book is called Career on Course. And it's really starting with you. Who are you? What do you value? What do you want out of this one magic life? And it starts with a value system. Then we get into the next section, which gives us permission to be in our own lane. And it talks about the difference between a specialist and a generalist. So you share a story about how you and your brother are in different roles. So how about you share that with us?
Well, thank you for pitching them to me, because after 7 books, I may have forgot which ones were which. So this actually came to me from a book I read called Range. Phenomenal book. David Epstein wrote a book called Range. And he introduced me kind of late in life to the idea of there's 2 kinds of professionals, specialist and generalist. One isn't better than the other. And Jen, it spoke to me. At the age of 50, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm a generalist, living in a world of friends who are specialists, anesthesiologists, orthodontists, patent attorneys, chemical engineers. And I think for me, it was so liberating. I wished I would have known this back in my 20s, because I would have been able to realize, okay, I'm a generalist. I'm doing some marketing, some sales, some writing, some sales management, PR work. I'm a podcaster, an author, a columnist. And my parents didn't value that. My parents valued the badge. Like, are you a doctor? Are you an attorney? Are you a mailman? Are you a barber? They just couldn't relate to anything other than the badge. My brother becomes this chemical engineer, hence the favorite child. We laugh about it all the time with my brother. I think it's so valuable for those who may be generalists. If you're a specialist, this chapter isn't for you. You probably announced you were a veterinarian in 3rd grade, or you knew you wanted to go to medical school. Great for you. But for the other 85% of the population who are uncovering and discovering and meandering, recognize that you may be a journalist, but don't just meander too much. You might want to tease them together, because you could be 50 or 60 and not have actually developed skills that people want to pay for. This chapter really speaks to the person who might be a little intimidated by the specialist.
It feels like they're a late bloomer, but
Or
really they're
late
not.
bloomer. Validate that you're a generalist, but then think about, how am I going to thread all these skills I've learned together into a value proposition that a client or a company will pay for?
Yeah. For me, when I read it, it was like, okay, that's their headline. That's not my headline, and it's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Both ways. One's not good or bad. Yes, you could be a specialist within a generalist category, or you could be a generalist within a specialist. You're a physician, but you're a general practitioner. It's meant for people like me that didn't get a badge and their family valued it, therefore they were kind of shamed or undervalued in society. There is no shame with being a generalist. In fact, most CEOs are generalists.
I believe it.
They have now background in sales, background in product development, background in marketing, background in communication. I think generalists are going to be increasingly valued as AI comes into the workplace. Companies need leaders with a diverse set of skills to lead, set vision, set mission, collaborate, create partnerships. It's an important skill for the future.
No, definitely. And I was reading another book that this chapter brought me back to, was how people are valuable, but more valuable are the relationships between the people.
it.
And the generalist is really that person that's the coordinator.
Every organization's competitive advantage is not their patents, processes, pricing of product. It is the relationships between their people to get stuff done, to forgive each other, to pre-forgive each other, to collaborate together. That is your unique value prop in any company.
Okay, so that's 2, right? Number 3 is about studying yourself and knowing yourself. You say you're decisive. How do you decipher decisive from impulsive?
For me, they're probably pretty similar.
I know, I feel so too, but one feels like a little more controlled than impulsive, doesn't always give the best connotation.
I should have written I'm impulsive. If I wrote I'm decisive, no, I'm actually both. I, like you, have a bias to action.
Yep.
I'm in movement. You and I are both forces of nature. No one hires you and I to give a eulogy at a funeral.
No.
They hire us to evacuate a burning building.
Yes.
You might need an ambulance, but you'll get out alive, right?
Yep.
And so you and I are always in motion. We're futurists. I tend to be decisive because life is short. I'm going to make some bad decisions. I'm going to owe some apologies. I'm going to have to fix some things. I probably could benefit more from being a little more deliberate, a little more intentional. But I kind of live my life around a B plan executed is better than an A plan not executed. I've met so many people who have analysis by paralysis and are so contemplative and thoughtful. I've written 7 books by the time you've written 1. That's not to say writing 1 is even better, because it might be if it's a better book. But it's something I struggle with, because I am pretty impulsive. As an adult, parent, and owner, I need to be more deliberate about that. But I would say I'm pretty decisive, mainly because at 56, I've made enough mistakes. I usually know what patterns I'm getting into and I try to avoid them. But it's also an area of growth for me, which leads to the chapter. The chapter is all about self-awareness.
And what's your favorite tactic or tool to use to become more self-aware? I would argue writing is obviously one of them.
Yeah, I will tell you, I'm very clear on this. It's surrounding yourself with people who you trust have your best interest at heart, and then asking them questions about you. How am I received? What is it like working with me? What's it like interviewing me? What's it like collaborating with me? What's it like going on a hike with me? What's it like?
How are you making that space safe enough for that other person to feel they're okay to comment?
That's the key point. You have to make it safe for them to tell you the truth. So first, you have to genuinely want the feedback. You can't defend it, deflect it, deny it, or dispute it. You have to say at the end of this podcast, hey, Jen, I genuinely want to know what's one thing I could do to be a better guest on a future podcast. And when they say, no, you were great. Say, no, Jen, you thought of 8 things while I was talking. What's one thing I could do? And then when they say it to you, don't say, yeah, because of this. Say, tell me more.
I like that. Because I think we defend ourselves, right?
Yeah.
This isn't a time to be defensive
That's
because
it.
you shut down the feedback.
That's right.
It's a time to receive and just sit with it. And then a day later, if you still feel like you need to defend yourself, you can do it and not interrupt the feedback.
That's right. It's also knowing in what situation would Jen feel most comfortable telling me the feedback. It might not be here in your house with a camera crew or your kids here. You might want an email from me later. You might like a text. So know what is the circumstance that the person giving the feedback would be most comfortable showing courage and consideration and telling you the truth.
Okay. What exercises are you doing for your own self-awareness?
Having a podcast where Reddit and YouTube exist for people to troll me and give me feedback. My oldest son, who's 14, Thatcher, about once a week, we sit out of my car in the driveway, engine on, air conditioning running, and we troll through all of the Reddit comments and YouTube comments, all of the thousands of hate that come in on my last week's appearances. We say, yep, ouch, harsh, mean, that's true. Should I change that? And we kind of go through all of them and say, what do we think is applicable to my style? I'm a stutterer. I have a speech impediment. And so I tend to talk really fast. I slur my words. I sometimes use the wrong word because I'm thinking of a word that I should replace with a stutter word. So sometimes
it's easier to say.
I say odd things because they don't quite fit. I'm not autistic that I know of, but I sometimes say odd things because I'm trying to replace a stutter word. And so one of the strategies, we just confront it and we read it all. But what I've done, like what you've done, is I have a sort of unappointed board of directors of 3 or 4 people who I know have my best interest at heart, and they have carte blanche to tell me everything they want. And then I really adjust based on what that 3 or 4 people that I've appointed tell me, because I know their agenda is to help me.
Okay. So those of you that are listening, like the know thyself, you might not have Reddit and YouTube ripping you apart. You're going to have 4 or 5 people that are your inner circle that you're going to give permission to, that you know, based on the respect that you each have for each other, that they have your best interest at heart, and they're going to give you the truth, and you're going to accept it so that they keep giving you the truth, because you don't want to block those resources because it's going to stunt your growth.
Can I tell you one thing I do also is I'll tell people I might need up to 30 seconds or a minute to digest it. So I might defend myself for a few seconds. I'm going to come around. So give me the grace of working through this for a moment. And my good friends know, give them a minute. I don't need 10 minutes, but I might need 60 seconds to process through it. But I'm going to come back around quick and say, you're right. I know. Tell me more.
Yeah. One of the things you talk about, number 4, we're going through this, is illustrate and recalibrate the long-term plan. So I look at your career, and you worked your way up through Franklin Covey. You were there for 25 years and then decided, hey, I am a C-suite executive in a publicly traded company. Maybe I should start looking at other things. Yeah. What was the writing on the wall for you?
I think a couple of things. 25 years is a long time.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is the company was moving in a new direction, and my skill set wasn't the right skill set for the role I was in. The company needed a new CMO. Okay. And I could have stayed. I could have reinvented myself. But quite frankly, I wasn't super passionate about doing that. I was 50, almost 4 at the time, and there were other things I wanted to do. I didn't want my career to be at one place the entire time. We had great conversations, the board of directors, the CEO, the president, and I. We talked about it for several years. We worked on a transition plan. I'll tell you, the proudest day of my life, Jen, was when I was back at the chairman's house just a couple of weeks ago helping him with his book, because I don't burn bridges. And so for me, it was all about what's next for me and how can I get the company in a good place? So I went to them and said, you need a different CMO. No, you can learn this. No, really, you need a different CEO and I need to go do some other things. So I'm very proud about how I unwound that. And my goal was always to make it to the C-suite. I didn't make it to be the CEO. I made it to be the CMO, and that was fine with me. It was an arbitrary but important goal, kind of like my guiding light. I think most people think about what's next. They don't think about what's after what's next. Right. So with my career, I played chess. I didn't play checkers. I was very deliberate around, well, if I want to be in the C-suite, then I'm probably going to need to be a SVP and an EVP and a VP, a director and a manager. I'm going to need supply chain and P&L experience, international experience, selling, managing, product development. I worked through all of those, and I think it's made me a better entrepreneur, having that long-term goal, because I checked into my plan. When I was about 23, I wrote the plan out, the 40-year plan.
That's not normal.
Not normal.
But that's great.
Sometimes I was off course.
Yeah.
But for me, it gave me something to revisit every year. I actually worked the plan remarkably well because I had one.
Okay, and so when we talk about this, like recalibrate, you were annually looking back at like, here's what I wrote down,
Totally.
here's what I want to be,
Yeah.
and then here's what I'm doing. And so every year it was a check-in.
In fact, I wrote the plan on the back of a TGI Fridays paper placemat. I started with, I want to be the CEO. I backcasted about 30 years, and I put in all of the key jobs I had to master, including at what age and what compensation. I want to make 80 grand and 150 grand and 200 grand and 300 grand. It was based in reality. I interviewed people. How do you become a CMO? How do you become a VP of sales? How do you get an international appointment? I wrote down all the talents, all the skills that I would need to master to move from director to general manager, move from general manager to VP, move from VP to EVP. So every year I was, okay, I need to learn profitability. I need to learn supply chain. I need to learn inventory turns. I need to learn how to calculate EBITDA. I need to manage a P&L, all those things. And I then moved to the next phase. And it really helped me keep my career on course.
You wrote this book
It's
because
true.
not many people, I don't know anybody besides you that's done that calculated of a deal, which I think is fantastic. And I think it's also important to highlight that you knew you had to interview people to be able to figure out what I
Yes.
needed for this. So if you're listening to this podcast today and you're thinking about different career options or maybe pivots or recalibrations, interview people.
Totally.
Meet others and see what they have to
skills
say.
would I need to have to make it into your role?
Yeah.
I also write in the book, serendipity is important, super important, right? I had an appointment that I was supposed to move to Australia. It actually didn't work out. I didn't go, and it got me back at the corporate headquarters. You're going to have serendipity. You're going to have disappointment.
And it doesn't feel like serendipity until you're past it.
Isn't that true?
Okay, so if you won't know it was serendipity until months later, understand that that's an aftermath, not a pre.
You know, you and I live our lives very similarly in terms of how we set goals. I absolutely believe sometimes a disappointment becomes an appointment. If something is done, you and I will both quickly realize if we can fix this, we'll fix it.
Yep.
But you and I also realize if we can't fix this, then we're going to pivot emotionally in a matter of seconds to plan B. And so I've always lived my career that I don't want someone else in control of it. I want to be in control, act or be acted upon, have a plan or be part of someone else's plan. And in all my interviews, all my mentorship, all my coaching, most people, I use that word a lot, most people are part of someone else's plan and they don't even know it. I wrote this book because someone once said to me, you're never in the room when your career is decided for you.
Right.
And it's so insulting and it's so true.
So true.
I wrote this book to have people stop being part of someone else's plan.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
everybody's got a plan for you and how it's going to help them or their growth or their career or their P&L. I didn't want anyone else controlling my career but myself, including if I screwed it up.
Yeah. Number 5 is define and build your brand. Do you think being at Franklin Covey, who builds brands for thought leaders, played into this chapter 5 for you? Because nowadays branding's big, but at the time you were building your brand, it really didn't have a name or language with it.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I have to think about that. Let me ask my therapist and I'll get back to you.
Okay, please.
But to answer it more specifically, this is not a new idea. Everyone's got a brand. I don't think most people really know what their brand is. I think they know what it is, but how you present yourself is rarely how it's received.
That's the importance of this whole 360 interview.
It's very, the exercise that I teach in this chapter is, what do you think your brand is? Go interview people, have them tell you what your brand is, and then write out, what do you want your brand to be? And then what are you going to do about it? I was always sort of a little bit of a square peg in a round hole, both at Disney and at Franklin Covey. I'm not the natural style of person at either company. It did help me to understand it doesn't matter what I think my brand is. What matters is what brand am I behaving myself into, and then how do I behave myself out of it? I created my own brand. No one else created it for me,
Right.
for good and for bad. There definitely is a dissonance between how your listeners and viewers see their own brand and how others receive it.
Yeah. And perception is reality.
It is. I mean, here's a great example. I don't see myself as high energy. I don't see myself as intense. I don't see myself as anxious. I'm like the poster child for all those things. And so I have a really warped sense of how I am received by others and how I present it. It's been super helpful for me to realize how my brand is received versus how I present it. And am I okay with that?
Okay.
'Cause
So
you
what's
might be
something you're
comfortable.
working on in your brand currently that you want to be more known for?
You mean which 30 things?
Yeah, or just pick one. I'm letting you pick one out of 30.
I want to be a better listener.
Okay. What are you implementing to do that?
Closing my lips
Okay.
and counting to 10 when someone is talking to me and then trying to eliminate my interruption. I like to help people. I like to solve their problems. I know it. I've been there. Let's do it this way. I interrupt a lot of people, and therefore I come across as kind of anxious, rude, impulsive. If I can just close my lips, count to 10, let the other person say what they want to say, the likelihood that my brand will be better received as a little more calm, deliberate, better listener is exponential. It's hard for me because I like to solve problems. I like to help you. It comes from a good place. I'm not trying to one-up you. I'm not trying to dominate you. My brain is going so fast that I'm thinking, oh, I can solve that. I already know the end of that story. Most of the time I don't. So I have to be more thoughtful about interrupting.
Yeah, so your space right now is just working on allowing the space to let things settle a little bit before you jump.
Allowing the other person to finish their thought and then respond.
Look how well you just did that.
Thank you very much.
Well done.
Thank you.
Quick learner.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is my favorite chapter because this is like me to a T. Disrupt yourself.
Yes.
How do you disrupt yourself?
I want to be the person firing me.
Okay.
I don't want someone else, like I mentioned before, impacting my career. This phrase, act or be acted upon, is really valuable in careers. Industry is moving fast. Disruption is happening. I'm comfortable putting myself in situations where I don't have proven expertise. I'm very comfortable being uncomfortable. It sounds like a cliche, but I'm always kind of moving beyond my skill set. I'll tell you, I'll be honest, I don't know about that. Let me go research that and find out. I'm very comfortable reinventing myself every couple of years.
For somebody who's not comfortable,
Get
what
comfortable.
what are some things they can do?
Yeah, talk about it. Ask people. If you were to use an acronym and I don't know what it is, I'll stop you and say, I don't know what that means. I'm kind of like the guy in the first row or first pew at church or class. I'll raise my hand because I don't really care if others think I don't look smart because I know most of them don't know either. So I am really comfortable asking questions. I'm a voracious reader like you, and I'm comfortable being uncomfortable. I am very comfortable raising my hand, metaphorically or literally, and saying, now that word you used, what does that mean? A lot of people will be embarrassed by that. They would feel like they would be perceived as not being smart, but I don't have that gene.
So for me, I think it's really easy to go on autopilot, right? This is my day. This is what I do. I've had to do little things throughout my day to disrupt myself, to make sure that I'm living with intention and not just going through the way things have always been.
Yeah.
When I go on vacation and I come home and then I'll go back into our pattern and I'll be like, why are we doing that?
Yeah,
like
I'm
we
doing the
should
same
shift
thing.
this thing. Every single time I open a door, I make myself do 3 deep breaths. And that just allows me to slow down a second and be like, okay, am I showing up the way I want to show up? Am I the human I want to be? Is this whatever? And I think if we get used to disrupting ourselves in these little ways, it builds that muscle to handle disruption in bigger ways.
It's great advice. You and I share a friend, Whitney Johnson. She wrote a book called
does.
Disrupt Yourself. What inspired me to write this chapter is that the research shows that after about 3 years, somewhere between 18 months and 3 years, we have perfected the job that we're in, and we subconsciously kind of phone it in. Our peers, our leaders recognize it before we do. You'd say almost empirically, after 3 years, the average person is kind of becoming complacent in their role. You want to disrupt yourself before your brand atrophies or somebody else says, I think it's time that we move you on or out. And so I was very cognizant of when I had kind of mastered the job and I was becoming complacent and I fired myself or moved myself into a different job.
Yeah. So I think somebody that's listening right now can be like, okay, well, how long am I in this job? Am I getting complacent? These jobs have 18 to 3 years where you get it figured out. And if you're being proactive to your leader or your manager and saying, hey, I'm getting this figured out. Is there other ways I can contribute or other things I could be doing to make sure that I'm continuously growing and expanding with the company?
I think in my experience, there are professionals that earned the job and it's like their pinnacle job and now they're going to sit for a decade. I have seen too many people sit for too long. And everybody else knows long before they do that it's time for you to move on. Maybe not up, maybe not out, maybe it's over. But I never wanted to be, honestly, Jen, I never wanted someone else to say, Scott's been in that role too long. Yeah. And so I always disrupted myself. And sometimes I left high paying, very secure jobs that I could have squatted on because I had the positional power and I was doing plenty to keep myself comfortable. But that to me is just anathema.
Yeah.
That I would stay in a job just because it was comfortable.
Yeah. Well, I think both you and I live by the fact that we're going to die someday. So what are these experiences that we want to have in this life?
Yeah.
And what is the resume that I'm leaving behind and what I'm getting known for? And it's not sitting somewhere and just punching the clock.
What's your phrase? You don't get
to choose when you die, but you sure get to choose how you live.
Probably the most profound thing I've heard.
This chapter is actually my favorite chapter, number 7. And it's take lead with your leader.
Yes.
Because I read that and I reflected back on my career days. Sometimes I did it subconsciously, but I was never intentional about it. And so this one talks about know your leader's aspirations and their goals and what they're trying to do so that you're cheerleading them on their pursuits.
It starts with the premise about how to become a leader. Jen, does it take training to become an anesthesiologist?
Yes.
Does it take training to become a commercial airline pilot? Mm-hmm. Does it take any training to become a leader? No. No, all you have to do is be a great individual producer. A job opens up, and then you get invited to take that job. And so the vast majority of leadership positions are full of highly competent individual contributors that got promoted up into leading people. And there's almost no correlation between the skills of being a great salesperson and being a leader of salespeople. In many ways, the competencies are inversely correlated.
In the mountains, you'll have these uber athletes, and then all of a sudden they decide to become these leaders of other people up the mountain. You're like, that's not your skill set. Your skill set is doing the thing, not teaching the thing.
That analogy, you just described corporate America. It's no one's fault other than the people luring individual contributors into leadership when it may not be the right path for them. So that's the premise to say, take the lead with your leader. Just because they're your leader doesn't mean they're comfortable having high courage conversations. It doesn't mean they're disciplined at setting goals. It doesn't mean they're great at giving you feedback. It doesn't mean they're great at time management or that they even know what your job is. They're the leader. They're probably there because they were invited to and it was the only way to earn more money or have more influence or get promoted. So I think first, individual contributors need to be a little more forgiving of their leaders. Leadership is tough. It is really hard. And you have no idea what's going on in their life. You don't know what their relationship is with their boss. You don't know how tenuous their job is. You don't know how scared they are. They're just people. I think actually there's very few bad people in leadership. It's good people that are untrained leaders. The statistics show, Jim, from the Harvard Business Review, that the average age someone is promoted into their first management position, age 30. Yet the average age that same person receives their first formal leadership development training, age 42. Ooh. Empirically, you've got millions of leaders who are wreaking havoc in companies for 12 years, not because they're bad people, they're untrained leaders. So the premise is if you want to manage your career, you may have to take the lead with your leader. That doesn't mean doing their job. It doesn't mean being their friend, but just getting to know them. What are their goals? How has their life changed? They need your contribution to change. I think there's this adversarial relationship between my leader should be super mature and super disciplined and responsible. People are people. They're usually good people in over their heads. If you're a little more forgiving and sit down to understand what are their fears, what are their goals, what brings them joy, how is their relationship with their leader, have a conversation. I mean, wouldn't your finest day be if one of your employees came to me and said, Jen, I'm going to guess something in your life has changed in the last 90 days. Is there anything I could do differently to help support your emerging pressures and goals? You would say, well, as a matter of fact, yes.
How, like, and this was in this chapter, and it's an area that I think I struggle with. How do you keep that boundary of supporting your leader and keeping the partnership, not making it a friendship?
Yeah, it's a great insight because friendly and friends are two different things. There always has to be distance. You cannot cross that line. It's irresponsible to lure your boss into that kind of friendship, and the same goes with the leader to the individual contributor. I think you should be as inquisitive as is appropriate. Every leader has certain boundaries. Every companies have certain cultures. You have to read the situation right. You can't just spread the same strategy. You might sit your leader down and say, hey, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you. And you ask, how is my performance? What are some things I can do differently? How has your world changed? Where is the company headed and what can I do differently? It comes back to putting your leader in a comfortable situation so that they feel courageous enough to share with you things they may not have done before.
And we all have experience in this because we all were children to our parents. We knew how to pitch them, right?
Yeah,
How do
or-
we get
or
this
work
done?
them.
Whatever. Yes,
Yes.
exactly. But in the book, I love this. You're going to need to buy it because it gives you a list of questions to ask and
Yeah.
questions not to ask
Yes.
so that you don't cross that line because it's not fun once you do.
And by the way, that chapter really is about understanding your leader and leading them because they have a disproportionate impact on your career.
No,
I
definitely.
mean, I have so many stories of people who think their leader views them one way, and then when I ask the leader about them, there is such massive dissonance it's because they haven't done the work to really understand how does their leader really view them. Don't assume your leader knows how to give you feedback. You may have to lead that conversation and set the conditions for them to share their truth in ways that they weren't otherwise natural doing.
Okay, so the next one is you get number 8 is hired for the job that you have.
Yes.
Plus the one that
Yeah.
you want. And the great story that you do in here that I think is so important to hit on is say you have this superstar salesman. The superstar salesman needs to do the superstar sales job. And then once he builds his credibility,
Yeah.
can give ideas on processes, tools,
Yeah.
and different things.
Yes.
It's not vice versa.
Totally. I don't believe that paying your dues is a corporate thing anymore because careers have been accelerated. You're absolutely right. How you build influence is through your track record. If you're coming to me to opining on the products of the company and you haven't sold enough products to have knowledge, I'm going to discount you. If you haven't met your last 9 quarterly sales goals, you're not going to have influence with the marketing strategy. So before you start opining on all the things wrong with the company, prove that you have accomplished and nailed everything that was asked of you with excellence. So there's a balance between being ambitious and sort of being opportunistic. I was a very ambitious person, but I was not opportunistic. I made sure that when I applied for the next position, I had a track record that was indisputable. Did I hit every quarter? No. Was I in HR's office by choice? No, not by choice. I was called in lots of times. Scott, stop saying that, or you can't do that. But people recognized that I was trying to improve and that I was delivering on my responsibility. I wasn't trying to do other people's jobs. I was doing my job and mastering it so that when I did apply for a new job or take on new roles, my track record was indisputable.
Yeah. Well, and you had such a clear path of like, hey, here's where I want to go.
I did.
So here's what I'm doing.
I did.
Here's what I need to do to get that next job. What is your feeling on balance? Because I think that's the big buzzword nowadays. If you're trying to do your job and the one you want,
Yes.
how do you have time to
Yeah.
make that all happen?
Yeah, it's not easy.
It doesn't happen.
I think a good formula is +1,
Okay.
meaning do the job you have and make sure that you're doing the job you have. By the way, the job you think you have may not be the job your leader thinks you have. Jobs change, demands change. So it is your responsibility to be checking in with your leader. Am I doing all the things you need me to do? Am I doing anything you don't want me to do? Has anything changed that I need to stop doing? Don't assume your leader is constantly monitoring everything you're working on. Ask your leader, Jen, I'm doing these 7 things. I think that's my job. Has anything changed that I should stop doing? Is anyone more important that you think I'm not focusing on? And when they tell you, say, great, thanks for telling me. I'm going to stop doing these things. I'm going to do these well, but I'm going to crush this one for you. Do a constant assessment of, am I delivering on the job you hired me to do? A great metaphor is if your job is to mow the lawn, don't paint the roof. Mow the lawn and then paint the roof. A lot of people confuse their passions and joys with the job they were hired to do. Do your job, check in with your leader, make sure that you're doing the same job they think you're supposed to be doing, and then do one more thing on top of it. Not before it, not alongside it, on top of it.
So this is all summarizing. Communication is so important. I'm a leader, and I know one of my weaknesses is I will overgive something to somebody. So all of a sudden they're overweighted with all the activity that they're supposed to be responsible for. I've had this conversation with them saying, come back to me and say, now you want me to do all this? I don't have time. What can be not priority?
Yeah.
That's exactly the same thing you said,
Yes.
just in a different way. If you're listening today, you're the advocate for you and your leader, and you're doing that by running the conversations and just being honest of what do we need to work on and what can I let sit?
Ideally, that's your leader's job. That doesn't always happen.
I'm a leader because I sometimes forget all the things that they're doing.
Totally. And you and I are unnaturally courageous.
Yes.
But not everybody works for the kind of leader that's comfortable having those conversations. So if you work for a leader who may be a little more conflict avoidant, a little more shy, a little more retiring, maybe not a great communicator, maybe they're a little bit disconnected, then it is your responsibility to lead that conversation. And not in a way that threatens your leader or intimidates them. Now, that might be the result. That's about them, not about you. But there is an art to leading your leader. My team leads me all the time. They know my hot buttons. They know what I'm great at. They know what I'm not great at. I love Liz Wiseman, another mutual friend of ours. As a leader, she says, ignore me as needed to get your job done. Because I want your job done. I don't want my last great idea or my last 10 great ideas done at the risk of you not delivering on what we've already agreed is your job.
Yeah, that's a good point. Number 9 is ears on the ground. You're always keeping a pulse on what's going on in the business, but also being cautious to not be involved in gossip.
Yeah.
What are some tips for people to do that and not get caught up in the gossip train?
So I'm going to pay another compliment because I'm on about 150 podcasts a year as a guest. No host has ever put the time and effort into reading my books like you have. I just want to call you out as a great prepared host.
Thank you.
This one is dangerous because gossip is the biggest cancer in every organization. There's a fine line to keeping your ear to the ground and becoming the company gossip. Here's what this means. You're being fired, shame on you, because that shouldn't be a surprise. Shame on your leader if you're surprised. You should know, are the conditions right for an acquisition? Is our revenue such that the last 4 quarters we've missed it? Because what's the first to go? Education, training, services, the beer on tap. If you're running the beer on tap, you're out. I mean, so you should just be super aware. I think too many professionals get hyper-focused on just their little world and they metaphorically put their head in the sand. That doesn't mean you're a periscope and you're watching everything all the time, but there's just a fine balance of understanding what's going on in the company. In the book I advocate, get a mentor, get a leader, ask them which divisions are growing, who are the best leaders to work for, what do you think is where our company is headed? It doesn't mean you're on a fishing expedition for gossip or proprietary information, but you should know what's happening in your company, even if you're front line. Now, you may not know that there's a secret acquisition going on or you're going public. A lot of those things are legally not available to even talk about.
Right.
But it's your job to make sure you have your finger in the pulse as much as you can so that you are in control of your career. You'll get caught off guard. Your job will get eliminated. Your industry will tank. There will be a recession. Look at the last 100 years. They're pretty predictable. And you want to do your best to anticipate those things so you're not caught off guard, but not so much where you're running around trying to fact find and viewed as someone who's constantly trying to be the kind of reporter. Because a lot of people can be doing that when what they're not doing is doing their job. It's like, in the olden days when you had a manual car, the clutch and the gas, it's this kind of careful calibration of clutch and gas, doing your job and being in the know, staying away from gossip and being in the know.
Yeah. I mean, it's less about the people and it's more about the things that are going on in the company.
That's right. And the industry.
Right.
And the competition and what's coming next in products. But it's also about, where do you think my skills best fit? Which division is on the rise? Which are the best leaders? Those are totally appropriate company questions to ask. Not who's having an affair, or are we going public, or I hear we're near bankruptcy. Those are things that probably are not your business.
Exactly.
Maybe bankruptcy, but
Yeah. And again, in the book, there's sections of questions
Thank
here
you.
that people can look at
Yeah.
and be like, oh, okay, I want to get a pulse of what's going on. I don't want to be gossip. Here's things to avoid and here's things to lean into. So I think that's super helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it really leads us into the last chapter, which is about like digging your well and before you're thirsty. And this is about just building your reputation outside of your industry, which I
Amen.
think is really hard for us to, until you notice you're not doing it, you don't notice you're not doing it.
And maybe it's not always outside your industry. It could be outside your company.
Yeah, because you had it with Franklin
I
Company,
did.
right?
I
Like,
mean,
talk about this.
I mean, I knew everybody in the company.
Right.
But none of them were going to be my path to success outside the company. This chapter comes from a phrase from Harvey Mackay. He wrote a book, Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And about 3 years prior to my decision to leave the company, which I talked to the chairman and CEO about, they knew that I wanted to stay for 3 more years. And I realized, oh my gosh, I know everybody in here, but I know nobody outside of here. And so I needed to go build my LinkedIn and build my Facebook and build my Instagram and build a network outside the company. Not in an opportunistic way, but I had been so insular because my company had been so long. You know, my tenure had been so long. So I do think this is a really valuable chapter for those who may have been either in the same industry or in the same role or the same company for a longer period of time than what's normal, because you do begin to atrophy on your network and your relationships. And there's a whole chapter about preparing yourself, because if your job was interrupted, if there was a recession, you lost your job, that is not when you start networking. That's not when you start posting on LinkedIn. I mean, everyone watching this interview or listening, you should be contributing to your social platforms in an abundant way. You should be posting value, connecting to people, offering to help people with nothing in return. I think I'm a good practitioner of that, because if I do need to call on someone for a favor, hopefully I've been adding value to them for years and decades abundantly. So if I ever do need it in reciprocity, it's there for me.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been preached about diversity and so many levels, but I don't know if we really put it into our mindset of like, I need diversity of industry, diversity of different businesses and different things that are going on. And so this chapter, I think, just really woke me up to some ideas.
70% of all new hires
A referral.
are referrals. 70%. 30% come from the algorithm that your resume was scanned in. 70% of all hires come from someone that connected you to the organization. And that, if that's not a plea to build your network, to dig your well before you're thirsty, I don't know what is.
So today we highlighted like one little bit out of each chapter just to tease the book, because it's so great.
Thanks.
Whatever part of your career you're on, right? Like I'm thinking of my kids before they go to college, like here's things to think about. I'm thinking of my friends who are pivoting and said, okay, I had a success, but I don't want to be a one-hit wonder. Like I want more. It hits such a wide range of people, and I think you did such a great job. What is something you learned about yourself when you were writing this book?
Probably that serendipity is more prevalent in people's career than maybe I gave credence to. I took kind of a hard line because I wanted to swing the pendulum a little far so that people could choose to swing it back. Because I do think when you have a plan and you work that plan, you're more in control of your career than if you didn't. And so I've learned that maybe I was a little too prescriptive on, you should know what you're gonna do 30 years from now. That's a little preposterous. But I think if you have like a guiding star, if you want to do something long-term, it's easier to get there if you've got your eye on a prize than if you're just sort of bouncing on like a pinball machine. Because I do believe that too many people are part of someone else's plan. That too many of us are responding to outside stimuli, outside environmental factors, and not taking enough control of our career. So maybe I was a little overly prescriptive, but better that than being under prescriptive.
And when I was writing my book, it brought back memories that I got to rewrite and relive, and then started putting some habits in place that were working so well I stopped doing them.
There you go.
Did you have any of that happen for you?
Well, so I wrote this book kind of at the end of my formal organizational career.
Okay.
And so now I'm an entrepreneur and an agent. And so a lot of those rules are either so ingrained in me, I'm living like my values.
Yeah.
And a lot of them aren't as relevant to me anymore because I'm post a 30-year organizational career.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm in a little bit of a different position, but there's still great principles. I'm teaching all 3 of our sons these principles. and all being forced to read the book, even though they're still in elementary and high
sorry.
school. These are good skills for high school students to learn.
Definitely.
They're going to have part-time jobs and things.
Yes.
I know yours will, because your work ethic is, I know, being instilled, and all 7 of those offspring.
You better believe it. All right. So buy the book, Amazon, book retailer, you will find it, Career on Course. And to follow Scott, what would you prefer?
LinkedIn,
Okay.
Instagram, Facebook, not on X,
Okay.
YouTube. I'm pretty much everywhere, my wife says, and it isn't a compliment.
No.
You can visit scottjeffreymiller.com. The podcast that I host is called On Leadership with Scott Miller. It's the world's largest leadership podcast. You have been a guest on that, and I'm sure you will return. So if you Google scottjeffreymiller.com, I'm probably going to come up.
Definitely. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for your time.